Okay, Robyn, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Oops. Hello, my name is Robyn McKenzie and I'm chairing the session on glass and First Peoples, as well as giving the first paper. And I am zooming from Canberra on the lands of the Ngambri Ngunnawal peoples. And as an acknowledgement of country, paying my respects to the traditional owners in the International Year of Glass, I want to open the session by showing you a work currently on display in the Canberra Museum and Art Gallery. So I will start by sharing my screen. And but that's not what I want to show. Yes. Oops. It's a glass yidaki by Ngambri elder Paul House, created in collaboration with glassblower Tom Rowney in 2016. Paul House did the Welcome to Country at the opening of this current federal parliament post-election, during which he played the yidaki, a wooden one. Perhaps next time it will be glass. There are YouTube videos, you can see Paul House playing this glass yidaki. So, glass and First Peoples. The papers in the session look at 3 instances of engagement with the medium of glass by First Nations artists. My paper first up, Kimberley Points in the Museum, looks at glass as a found material in 19th century stone tool making. Following that, Donna Kennedy, the executive director of Glass Inc., will talk about the potential she sees in the workshops they have been running for Indigenous artists in various glassworking techniques. And finally, the discussion of Yhonnie Scarce's work, specifically her contribution to the 3rd National Indigenous Art Triennial, Defying Empire, held at the National Gallery of Australia in 2017. It will be delivered via pre-recorded video. So we'll hear from the artist herself firstly, and then from curator Tina Baum. And there will be time for questions at the end of the session. You can log them in the chat as we go. And finally, a reminder that this session is being recorded. So I have to introduce myself. Where's my bio? I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Australian National University, working on a project titled Beyond Reconciliation, Truth-Telling for Indigenous Wellbeing and the Health of the Nation. I have research interests in First Nations collections, museums, and the making of value. And since I worked on a project 2016 to 20, which was called Talking About Stones, and looked at the collections of First Nations artifacts, stone artifacts that are found in local small town museums in the Riverina. I've been, since that time, interested in how this material, which is often seen as being ungiving, in fact, for museum displays, is presented in museum contexts. So I'll be talking about Kimberley Points in the museum. Just what are Kimberley Points? Well, a Kimberley Point is the name given to a type of finely worked spearhead, symmetrical, oval-shaped bifacial blades with characteristic serrated teeth along both edges, made in the Kimberley region of Western Australia. They were traditionally made of stone, and this example, which is from the Macleay collection at the University of Sydney, is made of quartz. This is another example from that collection, particularly good in showing, or because they're kind of exaggerated, these serrated or dentate edges. But Kimberley points are most renowned for being made from non-traditional found materials, coloured bottle glass, as here, and white insulator ceramic. And it's these materials that predominate in museum collections to such a degree that the Kimberley point as a tool type has come to be seen by default, in a sense, as the product of colonial encounter, even though it existed before. So in the Kimberley point, as a term, comes to stand for this traditional hunter-gatherer stoneworking skill set being applied to an industrially manufactured material. And Kimberley points were popular among collectors in the later 19th and early 20th centuries, which is why they are so well represented in our collecting institutions. And it's that popularity, I suppose, which I am looking at today. One of the arguments that attaches to these objects is that they came to be made specifically to service the tourist collectibles market that grew up around them, and were also traded to other Aboriginal groups. That rather than functional objects, their primary role was as trade commodities. But at the same time, they were considered by archaeologists as the pinnacle of stone tool making practice in Australia. The techniques used to make them, one is termed percussion flaking, where the blank of the stone tool is hit with another stone, flaking off fragments, and that is used to shape and thin the blade. And then pressure flaking is used to create the dentate margins. That is, a wooden or a bone tool is pressed against the edge of the stone blade to remove those small flakes of material. And while these techniques as such were common enough, it is the level of proficiency with them required in the making of Kimberley points that is seen as exemplary. As you can see in this image here, the point itself and in the other examples that have shown, they're quite thin and delicate, although at the same time sharp and functional. It was the remoteness of the Kimberley and the lateness of colonial infiltration and settlement of the region that meant that Indigenous people maintained these skills longer than another area of Australia, at least up until the later 20th century, in fact. And Kim Ackerman, who's a white archaeologist, was taught how to make them by Kimberley men in the 1970s, and he continues to pass on that knowledge. Just an anecdote here. I was introduced to Ulrika Stottrop. She's the deputy director of the Ruhr Museum in Essen, by a mutual friend, and we exchanged some information about our research interests. She's a geologist by training. She describes herself as a museum person through and through, very much interested in the cultural history of collecting and exhibiting. And she shared with me this image of her favourite thing in her museum, a singular Kimberley point, the one that they have in their collection. It's made from green bottle glass, thought to be a Beck's, the German beer bottle glass, but unfortunately without any hard evidence for that. But anyway, she wrote to me about it. A masterpiece, isn't it? Kimberley points are uniquely attractive, peculiarly charismatic museum objects. The thing that interests me about them is what they produce or provoke. From academic arguments about their function, perhaps not so surprising, to protestations of devotion, my favourite thing. There are videos on YouTube about them. There are musical compositions written, inspired by them, which I will get to at the end if there is time. In 2008, Rodney Harrison wrote an article trying to understand their effect on colonial collectors. He described their attraction in terms of fascination, distraction, captivation, and enchantment. His approach was following in the footsteps of Alfred Gell's influential arguments in his essays of the 1990s, attributing a kind of agency to otherwise inanimate material objects through the responses, interpretations, actions that they elicited or motivated within a networked social matrix. So as Harrison writes, both the Aboriginal people who manufactured them and the points themselves embody particular kinds of agency, which made the points desirable to antiquarians and collectors. Agency which continues to work its captivating power in the present. In Harrison's analysis, this captivation was produced by the spectacle of what he termed unimaginable virtuosity, a kind of weird argument that the reason that people were so enthralled by them was that they couldn't possibly understand how they could be made. And while it's true that how those fine margins were made was a mystery for some time, it's not a way of thinking that I myself immediately attached to things that I see in a museum context. And I feel that he discounts their aesthetic appeal and what is a more conventional explanation of their beauty, which is that idea of mastery, skills exercised and honed against the qualities and capacities of a particular material, reaching an apex point or zenith. The appreciation of which I would argue is experienced as intuitive rather than something reasoned or needing to be accounted for, such as not something I could do myself. Something which this quote from Love suggests was also part of what was the appeal to the people who made them as well. Now, Harrison was a strong proponent of the thesis that while these blades may have been made in limited numbers beforehand, they only became a focus of manufacture post-1885 to satisfy the appetites of European collectors. And one of the arguments he used to support this was that they were rare in the prehistoric archaeological record. Kim Ackerman countered this with the observation from his own fieldwork that hunters would rarely discard complete points, that they were highly valued and carefully curated. This is why they were not found abandoned at sites. And my second anecdote, he suggested an alternative possible cause being the thieving of male bowerbirds. Male bowerbirds covet coloured objects, sometimes all of one particular colour, to decorate their bowers as part of courting rituals to attract a female partner. Ackerman had himself retrieved several points from a twig home. So here we have another argument which is brought into this whole kind of arena from the outside. In his article, Harrison positioned the installation of Kimberley points at the National Museum of Australia, which we see here, at the end of a long line of encounters that had built one on another to establish the systems of desire to which these points appeal. And he writes, the very nature of the display serves to highlight the captivating powers of the pressure flake points and their incorporation of archaeologists, antiquarians, and members of the museum-going public into particular systems or forms of desire through technologies of enchantment. And he's particularly affronted by the way that the display is set up. You can see on the left there in this image, there is a sign which says stone tools. He's affronted by the contradiction as he sees it of First Nations stone tool culture, the display of which actually continues sort of behind the wall here, being represented by this one hybrid cross-cultural and predominantly glass artifact, which he sees as this mirror of colonial desire. He sees a siren call in the captivating agency of Kimberley points. But what I think his narrative here leaves out is the role of the people actually involved in the museum. And in this instance, the preparators, the curators who worked on the development of this exhibit. And so I wanted to counter with just some of this information. He sees this sort of quasi-magical process of enchantment being the thing which gave this exhibit form. And in his narrative, it is an emanation of a kind of cumulative, supra-individual cultural process, but you can bring it back, in fact, to people and social histories. The display was part of the inaugural fit-out of the museum for when it opened on the 11th of March in 2001. And Thylacine, the design company, then a startup, had won the tender for the whole museum, which meant that they had to scale up and expand their capacity pretty quickly. And they worked in teams, headed by a lead preparator, who for this job was the artist Neil Roberts. The whole exercise of getting the museum ready to be open to the public meant this was a pressured environment. Museum staff and processes were stretched. The story is that Neil Roberts was given his head on this exhibit in a way that would not have happened under more normal circumstances. Roberts had originally trained as a glass artist. He had been trained as a glass blower at the Jam Factory in Adelaide, and then at Orifice's Glass School in Sweden, and the Experimental Glass Workshop in New York. And he came in Canberra in 1983 to work at the glass workshop at the School of Art at the ANU under Klaus Moyer. His practice after that point expanded, and he incorporated other media, particularly found objects. He collected things in everyday objects associated in particular with men's lives and their work, such as tools, funnily enough. And he worked in the medium of assemblage. His public commissions included working with collections. And at this time, artists working with the collections of institutions had become a bit of a thing. There was an exhibition, Archives in the Everyday, organised by the Canberra Contemporary Art Space, which inserted artists into working with the collections of the various institutions around town. So the upshot is that there is a strong sense in which any distinction between a job undertaken to the direction of a brief and Roberts' own practice as an artist are blurred in the making of this particular display. And while a decision had ever to be made to highlight the aesthetic dimension of the points rather than their functionality, this particular display, I think, understands and honours the beauty of these objects through its own crafted response. The soft backlighting allows the crystalline faceting of the work surface of the blade to be seen while activating the translucent glow of its material. And the serried array, the effect of multiples, among other things, makes a feature of the quality and variety of colour. And if you look closely, it's not just a light box that we have here, but there are within it 3 plates of clear glass which are attached to metal studs that sit within the box that modulate the light. And you can see them also on this angled shot, as well as interrupting the field of vision, an intervention seemingly slight, but essential, I would say, to the success of the work, and something that's in excess of that long chain of enchantment of the points. But it was this particular installation the display rather, at the National Museum, which has since then also gone on to inspire further acts of creativity. And so this particular point here, which is a brown beer bottle point, became the inspiration for a composition by Slava and Leonard Gregorian, who were commissioned to go around the museum and to respond to things in their collection. The display was also Alana Katz-Chernin favourite object in the museum when she was commissioned in 2009 to again respond to the collections in the museum. I'm going to play a piece of her composition at the end, but firstly I wanted to show another response to Kimberley Points, which is a video from the Australian Museum, which is on YouTube. So I'll just have to stop sharing and get out of my slideshow and just bear with me while I stop sharing and share my screen again, this time. I hope that is working now. Sharing.
Yes, we can see it, Rob.
Just runs for it. That's good. Have we got time there, Alison? So now I'll play the musical composition by Alana Katz-Chernin. call it a halt there. And thank you. And I'll introduce the next speaker. Okay. Donna. Hi. So, how do you take over? I'm not sure about that.
Perhaps I'll just jump in if that's okay.
Yes.
Oh, here's Alison.
Yes, I think Robyn, just invite Donna to share her screen.
Okay. Yes. So this is Donna Kennedy.
Okay.
Ran a LED light studio until 2005 and was executive director of Architectural Glass Design Australia from 2008 to 2015. In her time with AGDA, Donna organised several exhibitions, including Glass at Fed Square, was involved in artistic and industry-based initiatives, and obtained a federal government grant, which allowed 58 Australian glassmakers to obtain their qualifications in 2012. In 2015, Donna started Glass Inc. with Bronwyn Hughes, with the stated aim of developing the use of glass in Australia in art and architecture in both the built and natural environments. Donna is currently its executive director. She is also Melbourne Polytechnic's glass course coordinator. Donna, over to you.
Thank you, Robyn. Thank you. I'm going to I'll share my screen. I'm not running through a PowerPoint. Got some photos to show you towards the end, but I'll pop up something. And there we go. Yes, I want to talk to you before I do show some photos of what we're doing. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we gather on, the people of the Kulin Nation. And in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community, and to pay respect to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So yes, I'm going to talk about our initiative, Glass Workshops for First Nations Artists and People. First, some background on Glass Inc. Bronwyn Hughes and I started GLASS, which stands for Glass, Light, Architecture and Art Synergies, as a not-for-profit association in 2015. We had very clear objectives. One was to protect the rich heritage of stained glass in Australia and ensure the conservation glass skills were retained. And another was to progress the future use of glass in art and architecture, which has immense potential. We had other aims aligning with these intentions. One was to be as inclusive as possible in our support, to focus on commercial outcomes for glass artists, designers and makers. Glass is a very practical art and provides many commercial as well as artistic outcomes. And also to align with social enterprise principles where possible in our initiatives. We also set a very strong intention to focus on education, with a special interest in bringing glass education to people who may have difficulties or limited opportunities to access same. We approached Melbourne Polytechnic and worked with them, and in 2020, MP delivered the Certificate 3 in Glass and Glazing Designed Glazing Stream, followed by the Certificate 4 in 2021. Once the courses were established, we were able to focus on other projects, and the First Nations Workshops idea had been with us since 2015. This year, all the elements to enable us to proceed with the project were in place, with generous support, funding from the City of Stonington to pay for tuition and materials, facilities, access and support from Melbourne Polytechnic, additional funding from the International Year of Glass 22, and Access Glass, who are supporting the course with glass tools. And as always, support from everyone involved with Glass Inc. Glass Inc. is a registered charity, and all of us who work with Glass Inc. are volunteers. The benefits of using one's creativity are well documented. And for the vulnerable amongst us, especially those dealing with situations that impact their very survival, spending time on a creative activity can have many benefits to physical and mental health and well-being. Creating with glass, even more so. I say that and I am biased, but glass is such an uplifting and inspiring material to work with. I've worked with glass artists for over 20 years, and while we have wonderful glass artists in this country, there was an obvious imbalance of diversity in the glass landscape. Of course, there are very significant First Nations artists who do work in glass. Yhonnie Scarce, both artist and glass maker, whose work is so important. Other artists, such as Tony Elbert and Marie Clark, have designed wonderful glass works made by other glass artists. And there are certainly other First Peoples glass artists, but it is a small group. And with the demise of most of the degree courses around Australia and lack of training in glass prior to 2020, the educational opportunities have not been there to remedy this situation. We started our program to provide the opportunity for First Nations artists and people to learn the skills needed to work with glass, to understand the materiality and properties of it, to better create glass works that reflect their culture. And we are excited to be able to offer this opportunity for First Peoples to use glass to express their creativity and bring their unique cultural influences to glass art. When designing a program to run for the first time, it's very important to understand, firstly, why the program is being run, and that's what I've just spoken about, who the program is aimed at, and how best to deliver it to suit their needs, which I'll address now. And thirdly, to understand the desired outcomes, particularly for the participants and also for the organisation, which I will cover a bit later. So first and foremost, we sought advice as to how we could be culturally respectful and responsive to the First Peoples who participated in the program. We were and are supported by the Melbourne Polytechnic Koori Services Centre, particularly the manager Claire Sadler. We also received support and advice from the Koori Heritage Trust, the City of Stonington, and other organisations. We put out a call for participants through all of these organisations and others approached us, and the word was generously spread by a lot of people, organisations, and through social media. The 4 teachers we have teach in the certificate courses at Melbourne Polytechnic: Deb Balin, Andy Cruz, Kirsten Lakin, and Bethany Wheeler, who are all glass artists and qualified TAFE teachers. They were all very keen to be part of the program. Beth had valuable previous experience, having spent 10 days in 2017 at Belgo, facilitating a glass workshop with 10 First Nations women to create a commission for the Art Gallery of Western Australia and the Desert River Sea Kimberley Art Then and Now project. Initially, I designed a fairly structured program, although we were always prepared to be guided by the participants. We also hope that they will eventually choose a name for the program, one that reflects their experience and that we can take forward into future programs. From the first lead light workshop we ran in late August 2022, we have consulted with those attending and restructured the program to suit their requirements. It became obvious that a weekly workshop was too much of a time commitment, so we changed it to a fortnightly program focusing on lead light and introducing a new technique every few weeks. Lead lighting, including cutting and handling glass, OH&S, leading and soldering, provides the basis for the learning of flat glass skills, as it does in the certificate courses as well. Other techniques being taught are copper foiling, stained glass painting, kiln forming, and sandblasting. The current program has focused on the workshops only this year. We have 18 registered participants. Some have attended all or most of the workshops. Others are yet to join because they're waiting for a particular technique. The program allows great flexibility, and we are working to make it as accessible as possible. Participants can jump in and out as it suits them. We have workshops up until the 3rd of December, then we'll have a break and resume in February. All tuition, materials and protective clothing and equipment is provided free to all participants, and the tools as well. We're also planning to provide free studio access in 2023. We will hold an exhibition of work produced in the program in our gallery space in Paran at the Australian Centre for Glass Design during NAIDOC Week 2023. As part of the flexibility of the program, where someone is particularly keen to learn and progress, we offer other access to learning. We currently have a person in the program who's very keen and showing great skill already. He is an artist and has taken to glass very quickly, hasn't worked with it before, but is adapting at a rapid pace, and I'll show you some of his work soon. We also run general workshops on alternate Saturdays and Thursday nights, and he has been coming to as many of those that he can as well for the last 2 months. He's already demonstrating the objectives of the program. He is producing well-developed glassworks which are infused with his love of his culture, produced from his heart and soul. In turn, these works are touching others and helping to foster understanding, knowledge and appreciation of First Nations culture among all who see his work. We are actually about to commission some work from him to stock in our gallery, and I have discussed approaching other organisations who I am sure will do the same, because this is also one of our objectives, to teach skills that lead to potential employment, self-employment and income opportunities, as well as creative and artistic outcomes. So I'll show you these now. Just bear with me a second. Some of our participants and their work. Okay, starting with Thelma, who's been with us from the start. And Thelma was also part of the Koori Heritage Trust Black Designers Program this year. And it's really interesting to have a look on the site, particularly at the Layers of Black exhibition, and there's some really good videos. And Thelma made some beautiful pieces, a series of crowns as her part of that exhibition, and we can't wait to see what else Thelma does with glass. We can see her there with her first panel. This is Gail. So Gail had the opportunity to learn lead lighting many years ago, but hadn't had the opportunity to continue with it. So she's been with us from the start as well, and she's really enjoying developing those skills and learning more and learning other skills as well. So this is a photo taken in our workshop. This is the studio at Melbourne Polytechnic, which was custom fitted to create a simulated work environment for the certificate students. And this is where we're running the program. So First Nations participants have access to all the same equipment. There are 4 kilns in that space as well. And right in the centre of that photo is Andy Cruz, one of our teachers, with some of the participants. Now, this is the work I wanted to particularly show you. This is Rick, and he designed this piece very early on, after only a couple of lessons. Again, he hadn't touched glass, hadn't done anything with glass before the workshop. The photo on the right, he's cut it all out in glass, and then the one on the left, he's starting to let it up. It's still in progress. I wished I could have shown you the finished piece, because I'm sure it's going to be amazing. And just interesting, he posted it on his Instagram, and he said that, you know, to acknowledge where I stand on this continent, and just how the glass, you know, how he's expressing himself in glass is just beautiful to see. And this is another current project of his, which is a kiln form piece. And that's just the glass cut out. It's going to be stunning as well. So just to finish up, sorry, stop sharing. There we go. The outcomes of the project, as I've just described, after a few short months, we are seeing outcomes that we hope for in a year's time, really. First Nations artists learning about and utilising glass to create work that represents them and their unique cultural influences and speaks to those who observe the works. We have only been delivering the program for a very short time, since the end of August. And as mentioned, we will continue this one until July 2023. We have seen a huge growth in interest and uptake in a short time, and we hope to be able to deliver the program ongoing after July and run a second and consequent program. The possibilities of this program are many and varied, and some of those possibilities are yet to be revealed, I'm sure, as we go along. One of the outcomes that we really hoped to achieve over time was that some of the workshop participants might be interested in formalising their education and applying for the Certificate 3 course. And last week, this objective was realised as well when Rick submitted his application to do the Cert 3 in next year in 2023. So that's very encouraging and a wonderful outcome for us. So thank you for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed hearing about our program, and we're very, very excited to keep running it and see where we end up with it.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks very much. We'll come back at the end to see if there's any questions from people after the next segment, which will be 2 videos. We'll be looking at the work of Yhonnie Scarce from the National Indigenous Art Triennial Defying Empire. Just Yhonnie is a descendant of the Kolkatha and Nukunu peoples, born in Woomera in South Australia, an artist with a substantial exhibiting career and her work held in major collections. And she's known primarily for her use of glass in experimental large-scale installations used to talk about the effects of colonisation on Aboriginal peoples in Australia. And after hearing from Yhonnie, Tina Baum, who was the curator of that exhibition, she's Gulamergan and Gulamergin, Larrakia, Waterman, Karijari peoples of the Northern Territory in Western Australia. And she was born and raised in Garamilla, Darwin. 30 years working in the sector in museums and art galleries. Since 2005, she has been the curator of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art at the National Gallery of Australia. She worked on the first 2 National Indigenous Art Triennials, and was the curator of this Defying Empire, the 3rd in 2017. So I think Alison will has teed up those videos to play. So we'll just start with those now, and I'll exit. Okay.
Thunder raining poison is a representation of a dissipating cloud, and that was a result of some research that I did related to the nuclear tests at Maralinga in the 1950s and early 60s. I've been working towards like a body of work about Maralinga anyway, but when I was approached a couple of years ago during Tarnandy, the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Festival in Adelaide, I was already thinking about creating a work related to the Baum clouds, and the cloud itself comprises of 2,000 pieces, which are glass yams, and part of that project too was working with the glass associates at the jam factory in Adelaide. Wanted to work with a group of people who I admired, but also I felt like it was a really great project to educate them on the history of South Australia and the history of Maralinga. So we did a visit up to Maralinga as part of that project, where the associates were able to see Maralinga firsthand, and we visited the breakaway site, where the bomb was so hot it turned the ground to glass, and they were able to interact with that. Well, I was as well. It was the first time that I'd visited that bomb site, but it was the second time I'd been to Maralinga. But it was a great project, I think, because I believe we all got something really great out of it in the end, even though it's a really quite sad story of, you know, the government, British and Australian government's disrespect to human life, that we were able to work together to create this piece that talks about those clouds. Nuclear tests actually of Maralinga, their clouds travelled across my grandfather's country, which is Gulbitha country. So a lot of that area too is the Woomera prohibited zone. And I was born in Woomera, and a lot of those planes left Woomera to fly through the clouds and things like that. So I feel like I've got quite a personal connection to that area, obviously because it's my birthplace, but yeah, just the stories in general from that area. The Blue Danubes are, I wouldn't say a series of 8 bombs, but they, because each Blue Danube is different to one another, but they do represent the nuclear weapon that was tested at Maralinga. There's 8 in total, and there's 4 that is at Defying Empire, and there's 3 from memory that are the largest ones out of the 8, and then there's a small one with clear yams inside them. So the purpose of those Blue Danubes was to represent the exact nuclear weapon, but I know that there were many others, but that was something that I was initially researching before other works that I created related to Maralinga. I think I was more attracted to these forms because I could replicate them in glass, but also the idea was to encase sort of like skeletal remains of yams of the bodies inside those Blue Danube. Each Blue Danube houses a variation of numbers of yams and variations of colours. So there's a few that are around that have lackluster colour, which represents like burning of the skin, and it's like an opalescent black colour but has blue and brown tones. And then there's clear and sandblasted and a variation of black and purpley colour. So the yams inside those Blue Danubes also are skinnier than what I normally would make, because for me they represent the landscape and the people dying as a result of these tests. Fallout Babies is about the children that were affected after or during the Maralinga tests. I travelled to Woomera last year to do research about my birthplace because I'd heard stories related to women miscarrying, but also having stillborn babies and also babies with deformities. The bush plums in this work represent embryonic state of pregnancy, but also different stages of pregnancy. And the largest plum that is sitting in one of those cribs is something that represents either a toddler or a young child. I think for me, it's the process. Like, it's something like to work with something that's molten hot from that you gather from a furnace, and then you can create an object from that. Was quite interesting. And for me, it was a challenge. Learn very quickly how to respect the medium. For me, it's been able to make something from your own hands and from your own breath that intrigued me quite a lot. The Defying Empire exhibition is a huge honour, and particularly because it's in the year, a year of the anniversary of the referendum. To celebrate Aboriginal artists as a whole in Canberra is a great opportunity, I think, for me particularly to celebrate with my peers and celebrate my work. I have a strong sense of pride to be a part of that exhibition. It's quite a significant achievement for a national institution to have such a big triennial that is, revolves around Aboriginal artists from many areas, from many parts of their career, and from many, diverse mediums that they work in.
Okay. If Alison tees up the next video, we'll now be hearing from Tina Baum, the curator of the exhibition. Tina, I have already introduced, in fact, so we can just go straight ahead. Yes, good.
Guliniwa Batiwa, or good afternoon. My name is Tina Baum, and I'm a Larrakia, Waterman and Gurudjeri woman from the Northern Territory and Western Australia. I'm the curator of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art at the National Gallery of Australia. And I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Eastern Kulin Nation of Naarm, Melbourne, and recognise the continuous connection to culture, community and country. I recognise their elders past and present, and I acknowledge everybody participating in the conference here today. Thank you for having me. I have the pleasure of speaking about one of a number of artists who are a favourite of mine, as I've got there, Yhonnie Scarce. So I've known Yhonnie Scarce for a very long time. A number of years ago, we met in Canberra, and since then I've watched her practice just flourish, as everybody else, no doubt, in the conference has seen as well. But I want to particularly talk about my experience with Yhonnie as the curator of the Defying Empire exhibition, the third National Indigenous Art Triennial in 2017. As I was selecting artists for the exhibition, when I had a conversation with Yhonnie about being involved and her works in the exhibition, she, of course, as she is still currently, focusing on looking at the Maralinga story that involved her father's people and her community there. And she was commissioned by the Art Gallery of South Australia for the Kennedy Festival to produce this incredible work, which I'll talk about shortly. But firstly, I just wanted to really run through the the kind of process and the background story to the production of this work, because I, along with, I think it was, between 15 or so artists from the Jam Factory, who of course helped Yhonnie create her incredible work for the Kennedy Festival, we all had an incredible experience going out to Maralinga. So, experiencing the country, hearing the stories from community and those that ran the Maralinga tours out there was incredible. It was so impactful and really, really changed my perspective of her work, not just as beautiful works that she produces, but also the very tangible connections that it has with Maralinga. On the screen here, as you can see, when you go out there, which I highly encourage everybody to go out there and take one of the Maralinga tours that they offer out there, and there's a lot of details on the internet about that. They take you out to all the various sites, and of course, Yhonnie talks very strongly about how the impact of going out there has had on her practice, and particularly the work she produces that relate to the Maralinga story, which of course is not only an Aboriginal story, it's an Australian and a British story. And so going out there and seeing and hearing about the different types of testing that occurred, whether it was, bombs released on the ground, tethered, or in the air, and how that's reflected in her practice is really profound. So these are, of course, some of the images that I've taken out there at some of the sites. And one thing she certainly talked about, which relates to the work that I'm about to talk about, at Breakaway, or particularly out there with the red sands at the Breakaway side, the blasts are so hot they turn the red sand to green. And of course, that green element is reflected in her work. So of course, I featured a number of her works in the Defying Empire exhibition, but the key work for the whole exhibition, and not only for Yhonnie and her community, of course, was her work Thunder Raining Poison. It really was a centerpiece. It's an incredible work to see it being installed with over 2,000 individual yams, which is, of course, an iconic shape that she features in her works that represent not only natural or native food source for her community out there, but also as a representation of Aboriginal people as well. And so, I really wanted to recognise in the exhibition not only Yhonnie's practice, but as she is one of the very few practicing and qualified Aboriginal glass artists in Australia, I felt it was really important to showcase glass as one of those elements. And there were a number of other elements that I really chose to feature strongly in the exhibition. Of course, this is an incredible quote from Yhonnie, which really, really underpinned, or still underpins, a lot of her work, but particularly this work, and one of the most powerful statements I think that she said, of course, as a glass blower, is that she makes these yams out of her own breath. So, her presence is within these works as well. And I just think that is a really powerful statement that she makes about her work. So I'll just give you a little moment just to read this through. So, of course, the Maralinga story, which, we would think that Australians would know about. And of course, it's not. It's not as widely known, particularly with younger audiences today. It's not that widely known that this testing occurred for a decade in the 50s and 60s, and the impact that it had on the Aboriginal communities out on country where they were testing, not only being physically removed, but also the after effects of the, this poisonous ashes and radiation out there that, you know, still has an impact on communities today. So this particular work, of course, was shown at the Kennedy Festival, and you know, it was just incredible to see it. I don't know if people saw the exhibition, but you came down these grand stairs, and it was just hanging and you know, sparkling in front of you, and it had such a breathtaking moment for many of the visitors there that, you know, we wanted to try to give that same sense of awe in the National Gallery showing of the work. Consequently, after Kennedy, of course, the National Gallery of Australia acquired the work. I was really pleased about that, since I'd gone on the whole journey with Yhonnie and her colleagues from the Jam Factory to create this incredible work. And as you can see in this particular image, not only are there the transparent yams in there, you've got the blues and the greens particularly as well. And of course that reflects back to, you know, the impact that these, you know, bombs had on country out there. And, you know, having this idea of something that is so fragile, made of glass, that represents this cloud, an after effect of such a destructive event is just so poetic and so beautiful. And so, you know, visitors coming through, thankfully, were really quite respectful and really, you know, really appreciated the work for what it actually was and for what story and message Yhonnie was putting across to audiences as they came through. At the National Gallery in Canberra, of course, it was co-located with Dee Harding's work, Their Little Black Slaves Perished in Isolation, which was another incredibly powerful work, very simple but very powerful, like Yhonnie's. You know, the two of them co-located in this space was really, really important, and to give them both a space around these incredibly powerful stories about death and isolation that they both related to. And yeah, I still have such you know, such a physical reaction whenever I see this image and remember the impact it had in that space. So just another daytime viewing of it there. Of course, another two works that we showcased of Yhonnie's in the exhibition, which relate again to Maralinga, to the Maralinga story, is her work Fallout Baby 1 to 5, which of course relates to, as I mentioned, the health after effects, the effects on babies out there, out in the community, the effects of radiation, which was really quite devastating in so many ways. And, you know, this is such a powerful but simple work, you know, with just the glass on the metal. You know, it for many of the sort of the mothers and the women coming through, that had really quite a powerful impact, because, you know, many, when they think of Maralinga, they think of the effects that it had on the men, which of course it did. You know, the soldiers and the, you know, the army personnel who were out there, who were being tested, which the radiation was being tested on, and as such, you know, it's a very kind of, when it comes to the actual bombing side of it by the British, you know, very male-dominated story, but of course it affected, you know, men, women and children, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal as well. And of course, her other iconic works, a number of which we acquired as well, Glass Bomb, Blue Danube series 1 to 3, which, and of course there's a fourth one there, which of course relates to the particular types of bombs that were detonated out there, whether they were dropped, whether they were, you know, detonated from the ground or tethered. And again, she's got these iconic, beautiful, just sinuous and beautiful yams inside each of these as well. So again, a really beautiful and simple way of representing this devastating event out there. And of course, on the opening night of Defying Empire, the three previous, or the three of us, the three National Indigenous Art Trainee or curators at the time were there, and we're really honoured to be able to share this space with Yhonnie and to hear her stories about this incredible work and the legacy that it actually leaves behind. It's one of those works which I think will leave a lasting impression on many who see it, but also her practice in general. Those that she sees, the works that she has at the National Gallery of Victoria, the Art Gallery South Australia, all across the country and internationally. I went to the Palais de Tokyo to see the incredible exhibition over there that she was featured in. And again, she's got another first, I suppose, a work that was shown there that was one of the longest or the tallest that she'd shown before, with really in really high spaces that she had to dangle these similar sort of cloud formations or ash formations with her work. But again, I think the wonderful thing about Yhonnie's practice is that she's not only got a local, regional, state, but she's got certainly a national and an international presence, which I'm sure many can agree with, that she deserves that recognition. And we certainly look forward to seeing what incredible shows she has in the future. But winning the architecture prize for her incredible installation near the National Gallery of Victoria, she's not limiting herself to just within the gallery spaces, but that external space as well, which is very fitting when you think about her connection to those Maralinga stories and her communities there. So I hope that gives everybody a small sense of, or a snippet of, the incredible work that Yhonnie produces, her practice, and of course, we at the National Gallery of Australia are really proud to have been able to acquire her works, to be able to showcase them, and to continue, more importantly, to support her in telling that story. Even though it happened, decades ago, it has still very real implications and impact to communities today whenever we tell and reveal that Maralinga story. So thank you for having me today and listening to me. And I think if we can continue to support our Aboriginal glass artists and more importantly hear those stories, I think we're all enriched by it even more in some way or another. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Tina. That was great, and great to see that work and to have the commentary by both the curator there and Yhonnie Scarce herself, with that intriguing notion that the bombs turned the sand to glass, and the connection then with her work and that idea of her breath making the yams. So just finishing up this session and wondering if there were any comments or questions from people, but I checked the chat before, and I'll just do that again. I don't think there's anything that's been logged there, so that might be it for our session, I think, unless there's no hands up that I can see. So we might call it there, and thank you all for listening, and thanks, Donna, also for your presentation. And your we've got a break now, a short break, with the next session starting at 4 p.m. Okay, and Donna, we will hear about your exhibition when it that you were talking about that there's going to be coming out of the workshops when that occurs. Hopefully, there'll be some way of getting that information out.
We'll do that. Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Thank
All
you.
right,
Thank you, Donna. That's terrific.
very good. All right.
You just need to put up your close stop video, and we'll just have a pause.